Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Draft Dogs YouTube channel. I was asked a question recently about the effect that college basketball would have on this entire NCAA realignment saga that's going on, and I think it's interesting. I went into, I did some research on some of the revenue that's brought in by basketball, and when I really looked at this, we'll get into it. I think it's really interesting to look at rivalries. I think it's interesting to look at which schools are more bringing, you would assume make more money in basketball than they do football. So let's take a look at a couple of these. The first thing I wanted to look at is this article I found from Zax, and yeah, granted, normally Zax is not something you want to look at for sports, and I never thought I'd be looking at it for sports, but they have a really interesting article here from January of 2019. How much money do college sports generate? And when you go down, I keep saying this right here, and they actually have a section that says it. Football is still king. And it's because it's true. And let's read this article. I want to read this and just follow along because it is interesting. It says men's basketball is the largest source of NCAA's total revenue. Now, that is it's surprising to hear that, but not when you dig deep. Let's look. It says because the NCAA tournament brings in lots of money, but even before teams reach the tournament level, they generate revenue for their schools with individual basketball games. It says, and at these school levels, basketball takes second chair to football. So per each game, basketball makes less than football. But that's not the argument that I want to make. When we look at the NCAA as a whole, we talk about, basketball makes more than football as a whole. Well, in basketball, there are over 350 teams eligible for the tournament every season. In football, there's something around 120. So it's not really all that surprising, especially with March Madness as big as that is. But what does March Madness have to do with conferences? You have the conference champions make the tournament. Once they get in the tournament, what does conference have to do with anything? Right? I don't think that would play an effect. I don't think that would have much of a role in keeping one school from going to another conference. I just don't. Let's keep reading. Excuse me. In fact, football garners more revenue than the next 35 other sports combined at Division One schools. On average, football brings in $31.9 million in revenue, while men's basketball, the second highest, comes in at a distant 8.1 million. So that's 4 times is what the average football program makes for each school on an individual level. They make 4 times as much money in football than they do at basketball. So I think that's the first thing to look at. That's on average. I think that's the big thing that we need to look at first. So with that said, let's go back to the spreadsheet and take a look at this. I think one important thing to notice here when looking at this, you can see these top schools. You see Georgia, you see Michigan and Ohio State. You see down here, you see Texas and Oklahoma. You see Notre Dame over here, Penn State. These schools make a ton of money. How many of these schools are two-way sports, right? How many of these schools dominate college basketball and college football? A lot of these schools, and I'll give you an example with the University of Kentucky, and I know this because I have a lot of family from Kentucky. They are known as a basketball state. The people down there take their sports seriously, whether they're rooting for Louisville or whether they're rooting for Kentucky. They take it very serious. You look in here and look where Kentucky ranks. I mean, they're way down the list in the SEC. and they make a ton based on their basketball. So I don't know. I just look at this, and you can see Louisville, they make a little bit more in football. I just look at this and I think if football in the average program makes 4 times the amount of basketball, I don't know. I just don't see that stopping a move. So with that, I want to look at one thing that I think is really important, and that's the rivalry aspect of basketball. Because one thing I have said in my previous videos, you have the Red River rivalry, Texas and Oklahoma. They're moving together. If Ohio State or Michigan were to make a move, I think the other goes with them. I think that's a given. And I've said that before. So one thing I think we need to look at are the great basketball rivalries. And before we get into that, one thing I do want to add is you have the Big Ten ACC Challenge in basketball every year. And my whole life growing up, that was, an annual thing that you looked forward to, whether, I'm from Ohio, and whether it was Ohio State was playing Miami or Ohio State was playing Duke or North Carolina. You always rooted for your conference to win that challenge, and a lot of times we didn't fare well against the ACC, but it's something that's why I thought the Big Ten and ACC have a better chance of merging until some of these reports of the Big Ten and the Pac-12. I think that's really interesting. So with that said, let's look at some of these rivalries and really take a look and see how some of these mergers would affect the rivalries. So just for time's sake and convenience sake, because I'm lazy, I went ahead and went to Bleacher Report, and I pulled up the top 25 basketball rivalries, and immediately, to no surprise, it's Duke and North Carolina. That is the Ohio State and Michigan of basketball. Anybody that grew up watching basketball knows this. You have Duke and North Carolina. Okay, let's think about this. Duke and North Carolina are right now both in the same conference. They're both in the ACC in football. So there is an argument to be made that if one of those schools were to go to the SEC or the Big Ten, that the other would likely go. That would make sense, but like I said in the last video, when you look at the map, since they're interstate rivals, when you look at the map, it makes sense that if the state chooses a conference that the other goes, that makes sense. So I don't think that this really affects anything, because I think if North Carolina chooses to leave the ACC or Duke chooses, I don't think it affects much, because I think the other goes along. That's my personal opinion. That's how I see it. There's nothing financially stopping it. As a matter of fact, geographically, it makes total sense. So that's number one. Let's look at number two. You have Louisville and Kentucky. Kentucky right now is in the SEC. Louisville is in the ACC. They're already out of conference. So there's not going to be a change unless Louisville goes to the AC or to the SEC, in which case, okay, well then it becomes a conference rivalry. That's the only difference. If Louisville were to join the Big Ten, who cares? It's still they're still not in the same conference. No difference. And those are the two biggest rivalries. I could attest to that. Number 3, Kansas and Kansas State. Well, as I've said before in my prior videos, whether the SEC gets Kansas, the Big Ten gets Kansas, whatever happens, or if the Big 12 were to merge with the Pac-12, whatever happens, I think Kansas and Kansas State go together. So I don't see that playing a difference. UCLA and Arizona being number 4. Now this one is pretty interesting. If there were a full conference merge of the Big Ten and the Pac-12, it wouldn't make any difference, because that would be a super conference. They would all join. Now, if UCLA were to jump on the train with, well, we'll look at it, with these top tier schools, as I had discussed before, and Arizona went to the SEC, that could have an effect. I don't think that one rivalry would stop the college realignment, though. And I think that's the key to remember, is we're talking about what here is going to stop the realignment of these schools. And I don't see much in the way of stopping this. There's nothing in basketball that would actually hinder this. In some cases, it actually makes more sense. Georgetown and Villanova, neither one have a Power 5 football school, although that is a great rivalry. Number 6, Indiana and Purdue. Both are in the Big Ten right now. Both bring in a fairly decent amount of money. In a merged situation of the Big Ten and Pac-12, has no effect. If Ohio State and Michigan were to go to the SEC, likely the rest of the Big Ten would merge with somebody. Has no effect. You keep going. Number 7, Kentucky and Florida. They're already in the same conference. Syracuse and Georgetown. Georgetown doesn't have a Power 5 school. Michigan and Ohio State, they're going to go together wherever the other goes. Duke and Maryland, they're not in the same conference as it is, so it has no effect. Michigan State, they're in the same conference. Now, this one is the one that kind of gets me, because if the only, in a scenario, and this is the scenario that was brought up, is if Ohio State and Michigan were to leave the Big Ten, what would happen? Well, Michigan State is a great rivalry. I don't know how Michigan State fans feel, but in my state of Ohio, we feel like we have a pretty decent rivalry with Michigan State along with Michigan. So, again, it's a big rivalry, but is that enough to stop an all-out move when the money comes to it, when the money comes talking? That's the question that I really think we need to think about. It is interesting, but I've seen 2 rivalries. I see UCLA and Arizona, and Michigan State. Those are the 2 rivalries in the top 11 on this list that hinder anything. But I don't think the money's there. I think these schools look, and I don't think they say, hey, this is so traditional that there's no way we could ever. No, I think they see the money. And I think they say, hey, we need to make a move. And it doesn't mean that schools can't play basketball. They can't have an out-of-conference match every year, annually, like Kentucky and Louisville. I just don't see that being a hindrance. And I could be wrong. Let me know if you disagree with me. I'm more than willing to admit when I'm wrong on things. Indiana and Kentucky, they're already not in the same conference. Kansas and Missouri, right now not in the same conference. If Kansas went to the SEC, obviously it would make more sense. I mean, you can see where I'm going with all of these. So when I look at this, and I'm looking at what's available, and obviously, like I've said, this is what we know. If Notre Dame goes to the Big Ten or the SEC, makes no difference from a basketball standpoint. As far as tradition goes, we're still looking at money. If Clemson and Florida State jump to the SEC, again, from a basketball standpoint, we're still seeing nothing. From a Pac-12, Big 12 merge, we're seeing nothing. From a Big 10 Pac-12 merge, we're seeing nothing. The most, if Ohio State and Michigan were to leave, you would certainly see some changes. If there were a partial merge of the Pac-12 to where Arizona and UCLA were split up, you would see a change in rivalries. Outside of that, from the money standpoint, basketball is not going to have an effect. And I reiterate that because it is really important. I don't think these leaders of these universities, of these conferences, are looking and saying, oh my God, Arizona and UCLA aren't going to play anymore. No, because if they really want, they'll just schedule. They'll schedule to play. So, I thank you guys for watching this. If you disagree with me, let me know. I'm totally willing to admit when I'm wrong. But this is what I see. I don't see anything
especially knowing that football is king. Yes, college basketball brings in a lot of money. A lot of that's based on the tournament, and how would a conference realignment affect when you have over 60 teams going into the tournament, but you have almost 300 teams missing the tournament? It doesn't seem to it doesn't seem to have an effect to me. And the money that the tournament brings in itself, that's based on the tournament. That's based on the big schools that are getting in every year with Kentucky and Kansas and North Carolina and Duke and over and over and over again. These are the schools bringing in money for those tournaments. And if they don't make it, okay, the tournament's still going to yield money. So I think that's the biggest money maker when it comes to college basketball. And knowing that overall, per school, because that's what we have to look at, is these schools are making their own decisions. If Ohio State, Michigan were to leave, for example, Texas and Oklahoma leaving, for example, if Clemson and Florida State were to leave, these schools are making decisions that they make 4 times more money in football on average than they do in basketball. That is key. Money is key. So let me know what you think. Like, subscribe. Again, if you have any issue, let me know. I want to hear it. I want to hear it. Okay? Everyone have a great day. Be safe.